This is a tribute for Rabbi Yehuda Laibel ben Reb Sholem Posner, a.k.a. Reb Laibel Posner. Reb Laibel Posner passed on yesterday. I personally knew him, I interviewed him, I spoke a lot to him, and I received very, very valuable information about the early years in 770 in the 1940s. I included much of it in my various books, Liquid and Lubavitch, Torah Vadas and Lubavitch, and other books. But I want to share a few things that L'Tevis L'Shmosai are to me unique and hopefully to you as well. Rabbi Laibel Posner was born in what was called Palestine in 1927 in Eretz Yisrael. I believe he writes on his card that they filled out in the 1960s, 63 I think, or that Rebbe wanted everyone to fill out their Lubavitch background and how they became Chabad and the details, family details. He writes there he was born in Rishon LeZion in Eretz Yisrael. His father, the noted chassid Reb Sholem Posner, who later was the dean of the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Pittsburgh, was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab, Friedeker Rebbe and the Rebbe, three Rabbeim. I'll never forget seeing him at a Mendel Futterfass at the third, I believe it was 1985, the second or third, Kinnis HaShluchim. I was there. We had only about 70, 80 chevra. And the two older chassidim that verbringed with us and we looked up to was Reb Sholem Posner and Reb Mendel Futterfass. Rabbi Reichik was also there, but he's from a little younger, next generation. Reb Laibel was an individual who spoke the emes. He didn't mince words. He was, in a way unfiltered, yet at the same time a Baal Seichel, a person who used his intellect, his logic, but you got the truth. So one of the issues that we discussed was in the 1940s, the Rosh Yeshiva of Lubavitch from 1946 on was Rabbi Gustman. He was the youngest dayan on Reb Chaim Oizer Grudensky's Vilna Bezdin in Vilna before the war. And in 1946, based on the recommendation of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Ushpal, who knew him from Vilna, they suggested, I believe, or were in discussions with the Friedeker Rebbe, and he was appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva of 770. And Reb Laibel was one of his ardent students, his Talmidim. And he told me that he taught him and his Chavedim how to properly learn Gemara and Tosfos and Mefarshim. And then they went to Halacha, Smicha, I believe. And he explained how his friends were like Peretz Hecht, Sholem, Rabbi Rimler, Feivel Rimler, Zolzain Gesund. These were people in the Beis Medrash. They might were a few years younger, but these were people in the Beis Medrash. Rabbi Laibel's older brother was Alman Posner. Now, amongst the things that they did in the yeshiva, in addition to learning what they did, Mesiba Shabbos. They were involved in an organization that at the time was 1946, I think, Adinoi, which was kind of the first concept of a Kinus Torah. Reb Lazer Silver once came to give a special shiur. Reb Moshe Feinstein came once to give a special shiur. It didn't last long, but Reb Laibel told me about that. I believe he told me he was there, I think, for Reb Lazer Silver's shiur, 1946, Shavuos 46, I believe. He told me and explained to me that the Friedeker Rebbe took the best Bocherim, Rabbi Greenberg, Rabbi Herschel Fogelman, these were the Mordechai Oltein, or the older Bocherim and others, and sent them to open the yeshivas in the Ori Asada. At the same time, he was from the younger class. There were three classes: older, middle, and younger. And he was from the middle, I believe. And he said that in the eyes of the literature gedolim of the time, the literature Rosh Yeshivas, here is a bacher who's 18, 19, 20, 21, the prime of his time and learning. What are you sending them away? And he said that the Beis Medrash was many times empty. Empty meaning, with only the younger Chavre there, and the older ones weren't there. And they had the literature of Shivas had a big problem with it. He can understand it, but that was what the Frierdiker Rebbe wanted and needed, and so it was. So going back to Rabbi Gustman, he said Rabbi Gustman was a precious Rosh Yeshiva, and he really loved the Talmidim, and they learned very well. For whatever reason, we're not going to go into it now. It's been printed, and some has been, some hasn't. But the Kitzur, briefly, it didn't work out, and the yeshiva let him go, and he made his own yeshiva, Or Yisrael, next to, on the Eastern Parkway, off Albany, the building adjacent to Chayv V'Torah, to the big shul, which stayed the Lubavitch Yeshiva as well. And there was a building that originally, I think, might have been a conservative shul. And they bought that building, I believe, and he made his yeshiva over there. And then when he made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Gustman, he moved the yeshiva to there, and it's in Rechavia on the corner of Ramban Street. So when you're in Rechavia, that corner building, it's a very lavish, nice building, Victorian style or Renaissance. It's an old kind of a building and has character to it. I've been in there. That's Rabbi Gustman's yeshiva, Or Yisrael. So Rav Gustman felt he can't be anymore in 770. The students came from France in 1950 and 49 or 50, and they wanted and kept the Sidurim that they had of Chassidus at the way it was in Brunois by Reb Nissen. And Rabbi Gustman was upset that they took a half an hour away from Nigla. They start normally before they came. Those French those Bachrim came from France. I believe they started. So this was an hour, an 8 to 9, not 7:30 to 9. So when they came, they said, "What do you mean? The Seder of Toim Pechmim is an hour and a half. It wasn't Lubavitch. Lubavitch was actually 2 hours." But anyway, so. They didn't kind of ask permission, and they forced themselves into doing, and and the American Bacher and Laibel Posner and the others, as I mentioned, they sided with Rabbi Gustman. He told me they were not happy about the Bacher from France that wanted the change, but they were. Not outnumbered, but they had a greater voice, the other Chevra. So, why am I saying this? Reb Laibel told me about the Holach Yelech, the back and forth. And Reb Shmuel and Rabbi Jacobson, who were the Mashpiyim in the yeshiva, in a way had their hands tied. So it became a very uncomfortable situation for Rabbi Gustman. So he announced his departure. They paid him severance pay. And that was that. By the way, Reb Gustman, I think it was this Reb Gustman who was standing online. I heard this from Rabbi Rosenfeld, who heard it from his father, Rabbi Simpson, and he was standing online for Yechidus, and Rabbi Simpson comes out and says, the Frierdiker Rebbe is not feeling well, everyone should go home. And Rabbi Gustman broke out with tremendous tears and crying, and was very emotional, and says, I have to see the Rebbe. Rabbi Simpson didn't know what to do, so he went back into the Rebbe and said, there's a Yid here, his name is Rabbi Gustman. Again, I'm not sure if the story was with him, because maybe there was another person, Gottesman, but could be it was with him. And the Rebbe said the name is Gustman. Gustman is in Yiddish, Gustman, God's name. So the Rebbe said, let him come in. He came in and he calmed the Rebbe. And the Rebbe, when he left, the Rebbe said to Rabbi Simpson, let the Yechidus continue. He was Mechai, he calmed me, he was Mechai Nefesh, he brought back life to me. So he had a very nice kesher with the previous Rebbe. And I believe with the Rebbe too, based on what Rabbi Laibel told me, but that's a whole discussion for itself. Let's go on. So Rabbi Laibel then was very close to the Rebbe in the sense that he, in the 1940s, there's the whole story with that the Levi of Yud Shvat, how he was chosen to be with the Aron, and that's a famous story. He told it over and it was printed. But something else that he told me, which is not so known, he said I believe he was the first Shliach of the Rebbe in America. Not like to Morocco. There was Lipsker and a few others. Not talking about that. They started with the previous Rebbe. But anyway, Rabbi Shmuel David Reichik came to LA in 1949. Now, Rabbi Reichik's job was, he was America's Shliach, and he was traveling around the United States, as we see from his Yuman. It's fascinating. All kinds of little cities. There was an Orthodox shul here and a little shtibala here, and he would go there and he would speak Torah and Chassidus, and then he would raise money for Americans. So he was quite busy, and the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Rebbe didn't want him to be tied down. There's a letter, I believe, about it. That they said that his job is he's a shadar. Rabbi Reichik was a shadar, shluchah d'Rabbanon. He has to have the accessibility and the ability to travel. To be a rabbi, a Rav of a shul, you have to tend to your flock, and you can't leave every Monday and Thursday. Meanwhile, people are gathering around Rabbi Reichik, the Hungarians that survived, and the Polish that survived in Los Angeles, and they looked at Rabbi Reichik as a tzaddik, which he was. I mean, in Chabad we say, Beinoni, but a very holy person, doesn't eat much, doesn't sleep much, davens and learns and helps people. Everyone knows Rabbi Reichik was a very, very the Yid. So Rabbi Reichik discusses it with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, okay, so I'll send you Laibel Posner. Laibel Posner wasn't an American, but he basically grew up in America. He came over to America, I think, in the early 30s. Reb Shalom Posner came over already in the early 30s to America. So he was pretty much an American boy, and thoughtful and learned, and had the Hasidic background, and had the Gesher, the Yichus, on and on and on. He was a good fit, and he went out there. And when I interviewed him, this is probably about 10 to 15 years ago, he took out letters, quite a few letters that he had from the Rebbe to him and him to the Rebbe. They were going back and forth. I don't know the details because I didn't get a chance to read them carefully. But the Balabatim there, they weren't ready for him, and yet the Rebbe sent him, and it was a very difficult situation. And Rabbi Laibel wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered back long letters, and it didn't work out, and he returned. But he told me that he felt that the Rebbe appointing him kind of his first shliach in America was a prelude for all the great things that happened in Los Angeles years later through Rabbi Reichik, through the coming of Rabbi Kunin in 1965 or 66, etc. And that the Kiddush HaShluchim, he saw how this Lubavitch, which was so small, it was nothing. It was a handful of people, and it blossomed, and it became a worldwide organization. He related to that, and then he was emotional, and it was a very special interview. I walked out of there, and I never had such an interview. So Rabbi Laibel Posner, then the rest of his life, he was a teacher in Yeshivas, and he was a sheikhet, I believe. He lived in Borough Park for many years, and he raised a beautiful family. The boys, which I know, his oldest son, Yosef Yitzchok, the Shliach Skoki, I believe, and then he has Chezi and Yecheskel, and Uri and Chezi, Uri Posner, Chezi Posner, and Shmuel Posner. Shmuel was a Shliach at the campus, Boston University, was made many Bali Tshuva, a good friend from the Yeshiva days in Morristown. He has a daughter in Eretz Yisrael, I believe. They should all have a nechama, and there's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The Zayda was definitely made it into the annals of Chabad, the Posner family and the Laibel. B'toichem, the kitzur an l'sheich na'oif ofar v'hu b'toichem, Rabbi Yehuda Laibel ben Rav Sholem, he zichrei baruch, and we should be zeicher to geula shleima b'mias Mashiach tzidkenu, amen v'amen.